So we're going to start writing now in the expansion of slavery box. And you're going to keep going with your catch annotating. So the expansion of slavery becomes a big deal because it's from 1808 to 1848 that we acquire a lot of land. And by acquire, I mean we get. And we don't just get, but we get it in a way of war. We get it from purchasing it. We get it from taking it. Well, the land was in the West. And as colonists first came, natives moved west across the Appalachian Mountains. And so what ends up happening is as we are, as a country, growing westward again, Indian removal becomes the thing. Indian Removal Act of 1830. This is when we have some events occur in our nation that are some of the more traumatic events for our native cultures, which, if you remember back to the video, they're not gone. So here you see a picture. This is a very famous painting of the Trail of Tears. Motivated by a desire for cotton-rich lands, many people supported the Indian Removal Act of 1830. What that meant was, we have all this new technology. We have the spinning jenny, we have cotton mills, we have railroads and steam engines, and we have the ability to harvest crops more efficiently and cheaper, and we have interchangeable parts. And so if we have all of these things, we need more land, according to how this particular section of history has been interpreted. And so what that means for you is they're going to move west. And as they move west, the way of life is going to go with them. So if the people were from the north and they did not have slaves, but they had indentured servants and they had a larger amount of immigration, or they had apprentices who were learning how to do a job by trade, they were going to continue that way as they move west. And then in the South, the way you know how to make money, being cotton farming, tobacco farming, trade, and so forth, that's going to continue as well. And if you're going to continue plantation agriculture, you must then still have people that will be working the land. And so what ends up happening is we, as a nation, geographically expand west and displace these native groups. And the Cherokee are one of the tribes in our state that actually ended up keeping their land. And the way they did that was when they were going to be forced out of northern Georgia, they hid in the mountains of North Carolina, and they were not forced to move. But many Cherokee were caught, and many Cherokee are actually west in what they called Indian Territory, which is present-day Oklahoma area. And we'll look at a map in just a second. So jot down some notes for this section looking at the federal government joined by states and troops. So this is the Army used this act, an act is a law passed by Congress, to force about 100,000 indigenous people, Native Americans, to move west of the Mississippi River because of the desire for farmland. Thousands of people died in these migrations, which as many remember as the Trail of Tears, forced to walk. Between 1776 and 1887, the United States seized over 1.5 billion acres from America's indigenous people by treaty and executive order. The Invasion of America shows, and that's the name of this website, I'm not necessarily calling it that, how by mapping every treaty and executive order during that period, it concludes with a map of present-day federal Indian reservations. So your source here is somebody has actually, or a group of people have gone out and they have researched all of these treaties, all of these executive orders from 1776 to 1887, and they have slowly done like a time, like an overtime view of what happened to native land. So you don't see much in the beginning, but you can kind of see how the blue seems to be disappearing now. So if I'm looking here, it's 1805. The Louisiana Purchase was made in 1802. Lewis and Clark went out around 1804, and notice all of this land right here, with the exception of some of this gold in here, is going to be the United States of America, its territories in 1805, and there are not currently Indian homelands that have been saved by the treaties. That doesn't mean people weren't still living there. It just means that according to the laws that we found and that the records that were kept, and by no means could they have been complete, at this point in our country where we left off, over 107 million acres of land had been, as we would say, either traded, sold, given, taken, or the executive order is the federal government comes in and says this is ours. And here you see it start to really pick up. There went the War of 1812, 1820. So we are expanding as a nation in this time period and moving west and starting to settle. Well, in the beginning or in this middle section was Louisiana. If you remember, this is the Louisiana River through here. Lewis and Clark went up there. They went through the Missouri River over through here and then picked up the Snake River to the Pacific Ocean. So all of this land here was part of the Louisiana Purchase. And what you're seeing here are the Rocky Mountains. This is the Continental Divide. And so here, 1830 would be the Indian Removal Act, and that's when these farmlands were wanted to be purchased or to be taken by, so I'll play that again, executive order, and then you just see how quickly it starts to speed up. Now you see reservations starting to be developed. Reservations are areas of land that are actually almost like their own independent country, where the indigenous people that live there have their own laws and ways of life and police systems. But you have to remember, it was all theirs before, and just because we didn't see it as a nation as they were the same as us, we kind of had the idea that the land was empty when it wasn't. And this is how we've ended up in 2010. So in the beginning, if you go all the way back, let's try here. That's the beginning, after the signing of the Constitution. This is the beginning of America. And once we get to 2010, this is the land reserved for natives. And you can see right here is North Carolina, and that's the Cherokee Reservation. Most of them being out west. This is Oklahoma, and this is where the Trail of Tears occurred. And there's actually a group of Cherokee that live here that did walk. So this Trail of Tears, they walked. And it wasn't just the Cherokee, it was many tribes across the country. After the land was taken or seized or given or sold, depending on which occasion, you see the spread of slavery. What you have here is an image that actually came about around the Civil War. This man here has endured severe beatings. His name that was given to the photographer Matthew Brady at the time was Gordon. And he was from Mississippi, and he ended up posing for this picture, very resistant at first, but then going ahead and going through it. And one thing that this picture seems to bring out in American history for most people is a realization of the cruelty it took to create those scars. Those are lifetime scars. Those are scars on top of scars. Most of the time when you see something like that, it is the product of a cat of nine tails. And what that was a weapon that had one handle and multiple straps of leather, like leather belt, and then embedded in the belt itself would be pieces of glass or rocks or different things, so that when the person was hit, and they called it flogging, so when they were flogged with that, those pieces would hit it multiple times in different spaces, and then whatever was stuck into the leather would then tear at the skin. And this was especially dangerous too, just from the idea of infection. Now, this man does have a story that turns out pretty well. He ends up becoming a soldier, fights in the Civil War to earn freedom, fights for the Union side. So he does live through slavery. He had escaped at this point in order to have the picture made. So the second wave of the slave trade, though, was especially horrific because it separated families who had been together for generations. So as people moved west and they took slaves and their way of life and plantation agriculture with them, families were separated. And life on cotton plantations was much harder than it was previously because of the type of cotton that was grown west of the Appalachian Mountains. So it had a lot more seeds, and harvesting it was much more difficult, very long hours to do so.